So far, we've discussed human-based point count, but sometimes you make a recording in the field so that you can go home and verify some of that you collected, or you don't even record species in the field. You do that all at home in the lab. So this is a different kind of data set because the sensitivity of the microphone, although it's usually calibrated, but can vary across units, types, and can be different from a human ear. So I think it has a different kind of observer. And so when that's the case, you get a lot more information for the time component of the recording. You know exactly when you detected something. You might not know if it's the same individual or not, but sometimes you might know that as well. But you don't really have a good handle on the distance. Although it relates to sound pressure levels, and there are a bunch of papers cited in the notes where you can read about this, how farther away from the observer sounds are going to be fainter to hear and on the sonogram as well. And as a result, you can create some kind of calibration model that would give you, based on sound level, what would be the distance. So you can, in a way, get distance information from recordings as well, but it's a bit more work. So development and research in this area is ongoing. And you can also not just take a human and recognize the species, you can build automated models to recognize based on sonograms. And then also quickly just what is driving the difference between human and recordings? It is the area that they are sampling over due to the sensitivity of ear versus recording. The same applies across different observers with different abilities. So you can look at open and closed environments, how detection function might be different, and then also across different units like humans, different kinds of equipment, SM2, SM3, other types of units, and you see slight variation in the detection functions, and as a result, the corresponding effective area sampled. So one particular study we did is when we had paired sampling happening at the same location, same times. And this way we could compare these methodological differences, because true abundance is the same no matter which technology you are using in the field. And because density is the same, and we could establish that the availability wasn't affected by human versus recording, these cancel out. So the difference, what you see in the mean counts, is really driven by the different areas sampled. And once we estimated that, we could adjust for the methodological differences. And this is what you can see here, how this model-based estimate is just going to be the ratio of the mean counts. And once you take that into account, this is the original bias that you get, the empty circles, if you don't account for whether it's an ARU or not across many species. Once you incorporate that ratio, then the counts are going to be adjusted back to the same value. So this is a way of, if you want to add recordings as another protocol to your data, so now imagine you have all those rows, now it's another project that was collected using recordings, I would suggest using the fact that it's a recording as an indicator, like a categorical variable, and use it as a fixed effect, because if you read this paper, we developed how that fixed effect beta really relates to this ratio. I think it was somewhere. Anyhow, so that beta is a function of this difference that you get. And so through a fixed effect, you can take care of this situation as long as the recordings were processed in the same way with respect to the time intervals. You are only counting the new individuals or kind of looking at the total number of individuals detected within a set time interval. That piece is easy. When you don't have that information, then you're looking at something else, and I don't have a clear answer how to best integrate that. Roadside bias is another important question, but this is really complicated. It's so complicated that we don't even have the data to come up with any answers, or very limited data is what we have, because on the road and off the road, density might be different. Or sometimes you can say on the pavement, no birds are nesting. When it's gravel, you might say, well, here's a nighthawk. But you run into that situation in really rarely used roads and very infrequently. Oftentimes the road surface itself is not a habitat. But behavior along the road in the area that you're sampling might actually be different. Also, the numbers are coming from not just the road, but the road and the surrounding forest or grassland. So it's a mixture of strata. You might also have an edge, which might behave differently from the interior of the forest. So behavior and also detectability, because sound travels farther away along the road than inside the forest. And it's really hard to know how these all combine together and what is their importance. So this is like a situation what we have in the boreal. Here's a road, here's a cut line, there's a valped. How do you describe this? There's a narrow one, there's a wider one. It's just a mess. And then you're sampling a small area, you're sampling a large area, you get all these mixed together. Now account for that. Skipping over some results. And then also often when we sample an area and you say, I'm moving into the forest or moving out of the forest, then you can say the amount of one habitat versus the other is going from 0 to 1. So when it's 0, it's habitat A. When it's 1, it's habitat B. So if I mix them together in different proportions, I get this linear relationship. And if I fit a GLM to it, the red line is going to be very close to the blue line, which is the true. Same thing if there's an opposite relationship. What happens with roads is we don't really have 100% road of a 1 square kilometer unit, because roads are much narrower. You get 10%, maybe 20. And this is the range what we are sampling, the proportion of roads in a larger area. And when you fit the line to this part and you try to extrapolate, because you want to know what is my abundance if it's 100% road, then if it's a negative relationship, you get some values which you might believe. But when it's an increasing trend to the amount of road that's there, like the species really loves these areas, then you're extrapolating, and this is where this breaks down. It fits well from where you observe the data, but outside of it, you have really no idea. So this is what's happening with the linear features. It is a mess, and I don't have a real good way of handling it other than some, I'm not saying shortcut, but just kind of just approximations that you can make. Okay, let's go to the very end. So this is how BSIMS handles the sound attenuation. If it crosses a linear feature, then depending on how this goes, so if the sound travels from here, it goes out from the forest, and then this is what you get. So if you do the simulation and include the road, then you get these distances shortened or elongated depending on what kind of stratum it goes through based on this simplification. So it handles that in a way which allows you to play with it and look at how much bias it gives. And so another way, because there's no clear answer of how to approach this from a modeling perspective, because it's a combination of all kinds of things. So it's not just detectability, it's not just density. So I'm using just offsets as if it were not a road, and use the presence of the road as a fixed effect. And you can also filter some roads which you say, well, highways are really different environments. Probably I shouldn't treat them the same way as other linear features in the middle of the forest. So you can filter some of the data and use it as a fixed effect combined with offsets. That's what I do in most of my work. It's not perfect, but it gets 90% of the way. And it also depends on how much roadside data you're having in your data set. Is it half of the data, in which case you need to take care of it? If it's just here and there, then you might be able to do something much simpler. And so what I see, the frontier is going to be recordings and related data sets are going to be more prevalent. They are now more prevalent, at least in Canada. And that just represent a new way of thinking about the data. Time to first detection information is going to be available, how you can use that, how you can maybe use automated species detection and distance estimation, or maybe just ditch this whole QPAD idea and come up with something else that can handle these other variation in methodologies, human point counts, recording units, all kinds of data. It's not quite clear yet what to do there, but maybe in 10 years in a similar workshop, I'll be able to tell you. And also eBird data as it just keeps increasing and it's globally available. And some of these corrections are going to eventually make their way into eBird data. There are also multiple protocols there, full day species lists versus traditional points counts, how to account for those. That's a big question. And also just plain roadsides and BBS data, combining that with non-roadside surveys, that is still something we're actively working on. And so one of the reasons why we are so focused on this is we want to know not just that, okay, based on BBS, this is the trend, but you might recall 2 years ago, there was this paper in Science about the bird declines by Rosenberg et al., which put a price tag on this in the sense of, okay, this is the trend, but if you multiply this trend with the actual number, then you're looking at 3 billion birds lost. And so that's the kind of message we want to be able to tell based on accounting for the true population size. And I might say that's probably closer to 5 billion birds lost if you update some of the assumptions that went into those partners in flight calculations, because they used roadside data and they used something that they call maximum detection distance, which is much larger than EDR that you get from distance sampling. And partly due to this recognition of, oh, there might be all kinds of biases due to the roads and what we assume the area we are sampling over. And I'm not going to explain this in detail. There's this quite recent paper in the Condor looking at different ways of estimating population size, comparing QPAD type approaches to the partners in flight approximation. We found that there were biases coming from mostly how roads are sampling habitats and how species respond to roads. And also the magnitude of the difference was due to the distance assumptions. So there are all kinds of large-scale results using QPAD-based estimates. One of them is in Alberta. Yes. So this is the Alberta-based results. I'll just go back here, pick a species. So when we take all this data and fit some GLM to it, then we can talk about average density of that species in all kinds of forest stands, and then show it spatially on a map. So this is really helpful in the Alberta context to make some land use related decisions, because we know human footprint is going to affect the species this way or that way, and that way we can evaluate if this is a listed species, then probably we should be careful with its habitats. And it's just going to help us understand the possible impacts of these. Another initiative is the Boreal Avian Modeling Project, where we have, again, quite a bit of modeling work that was done on these 143 species. This is based on boosted regression trees. They are beta based on GLMs. You can see how we can capture the distribution and then talk about land cover based mean densities and population sizes in different regions within Canada. So these are some of the applications, and these were the original motivation for coming up with these ideas, because in the Boreal Avian Modeling Project, all these dots are coming from lots of different protocols and projects. So all those people who contributed data and did all the work, they weren't following the same standards. So it was our job to integrate this into a database and come up with these adjustments, and then fit these models and present them. And finally, there's this NAPOPs initiative, which is taking this idea to the next level, kind of going full circle. We're now going to try to estimate this for as many species as possible, and not just in Canada and the boreal of the US, but across North America, so that these can inform the population size estimates for partners in flight. And Adam Smith and Brandon Edwards is spearheading this project right now. We have 351 species, almost 300 projects, lots of sampling events, and close to 6.7 million bird observations. And this is still a work in progress, but Brandon is making really good progress on this, and it's likely going to get published in the near future. So this follows the same logic as QPAD, but now we are looking at also roadside based adjustments, which is going to be really crucial if you want to combine roadside surveys with non-roadside surveys, which are more prevalent in the US. Lot more roads and a lot more reliance on BBS type surveys. So that was it. And so now I think if I have to summarize, why is it a good idea to use all this complexity? I would say if you have a single method and you want to talk about density and you say, well, I think these assumptions are kind of okay, then you can go ahead and adjust for time and distance and get something that you would interpret as density. If you don't want density and you have a single methodology, maybe you don't need to do any of this. You just have to convince the reviewers that what you are doing is perfectly fine, because your question don't require any adjustment for imperfect detection. However, if you have multiple projects with different methodologies, you need to find a way to account for that, and that can be achieved in many different ways. One well thought of way would be to use QPAD ideas if you have the removal sampling, distance sampling data to support it. And this would also give you absolute density, given that we satisfy all those assumptions. So thanks very much for listening to me for my 12-hour elevator pitch. So this is like when you're stuck with me in an elevator when the power is out and I keep talking about QPAD. This is my elevator pitch. Otherwise, now it's up to you to ask questions, and there were some really good ones in the chat about when to use relative abundance and things like that.